Hi everybody, and welcome to my very first yoga tutorial. If you haven't met me before, my name's Blue. Now I've got a really good question from one of my much appreciated Patreon sponsors, Bernie Hughes. She's having problems with doing movements in her yoga practice where she has to reach her hands around behind her back or possibly even bind her fingertips together and reach her arms away from her spine or do these big external rotations in her shoulders or her chest. So I really feel for you there, Bernie. Now that can be quite tricky when you've got a frozen shoulder. It can even be quite painful. So what we're going to do is look at some ways to go about that, some different variations to take while you're in postures, and even a few little exercises that could possibly help you regain a little bit of mobility or at least release a bit of tension. So let's get straight into it. So the first thing to consider when we're doing these external rotations of the shoulder joint and trying to sort of place the hands behind the back or do these poses where we bind the fingertips together and even try to lift the knuckles away from the lower back, creating this big sort of dramatic opening in the chest, is that often we don't actually even need to do these big sort of dramatic opening movements. You can probably even get a similar stretch just by lifting the shoulders, by drawing the shoulder blades towards the spine and opening the chest that way. Now, that's a nice little variation. That's a really sort of passive variation on a big chest opening stretch. But also, and probably the most important thing to consider, is what will really restrict your movement the most is it's actually the binding of the fingertips when we try and do these postures. Binding the fingertips and trying to place the palms sort of facing towards one another that creates that really extreme opening, that really deep external rotation or exaggerated external rotation of the shoulders. So a good variation for that is instead of actually placing or trying to bind the fingertips, which can be quite painful even if you're dealing with frozen shoulder, is just to place the backs of the hands on your hips here. And that's quite nice. And then you can sort of practice drawing the shoulder blades together and even drawing the elbows sort of towards one another. And then you can just release as well. And this can happen sort of in any posture where you might be asked to bind the fingertips or reach behind your back. Now, if you wanted to go even further, then you would probably cross the hands over. Now, there's an important tip here. So hopefully you've got one arm with a little bit more mobility. You would put the arm with more mobility, or the hand connected to the arm with more mobility, under the frozen arm. Now, what that means is if you are at this posture and you do get the opportunity to sort of start to move into it a little bit deeper or play with sort of expanding into the pose, is you can put a little bit of pressure through that good arm into the back of the frozen arm and gently push it away from your body. So by doing that, you're really passively just sort of introducing a little bit more movement into the hand there as well. And this can be done in any posture. You might be folding forward, you might be standing up in a lunge. So remembering that you want the hand attached to the arm with more mobility underneath, so you can gently press or lift the frozen arm away from the back. Now, if that's too much, that's fine. Remember, we can always just have the backs of the hands on the hips as well. We'll also go through a nice little variation of balasana, of child's pose, where we're doing these movements and we can start to actually sort of lift the shoulders away from the body. So for those of you who actually have very little movement in the arms, and even placing the hands on the backs of the hips like that is tricky, I'll show you a nice little movement we can do when we're in balasana, when we're in child's pose, to sort of start to introduce some sort of external, internal rotation into the shoulders. So what we will do is we will fold forward and we'll just place the hands down onto the mat here, with the backs of the hands on the mat. Now you might be propping your forehead up on something, you might be resting on the mat. Now often in classes you'll be asked to bind your fingertips together, reach up towards the ceiling, lift the shoulders, all of that. Probably impossible if you've got a frozen shoulder, or at least painful or difficult. So the next place to start from here would be to just put your hands on the backs of your ankles. And then what we want to do is actually practice lifting the shoulders. Like I said earlier, it's not so much always about reaching and pulling on yourself so much. Sometimes just drawing the shoulder blades towards the spine will give you the opening you need. And then starting to point the elbows towards the ceiling. But remember, you're broadening the chest. It's not so much about the extension of the arm, it's sort of the origin, the shoulder that we're trying to open up here. And you can let the arms fall all the way down to the mat now. That's creating that nice internal rotation of the shoulder. See how that feels. Don't push it too far. And then we might lift back up. And point the elbows towards the ceiling. That's it. And lower back down. Now obviously the next stage would be to place the backs of the hands on the hips here. And then we would do the same thing. You can lower the elbows down. And that's a nice internal rotation of the shoulder joint. I can feel that expanding into the back of my body there. And then I can rotate and lift the elbows. And then release. We'll do it one more. Lift and release. And bring the hands back down to the mat. Okay, I hope you found that helpful, and thanks very much, Bernie, for the great question. And thanks again to all of my Patreon sponsors. You guys are total legends. If you want to become a Patreon sponsor and unlock the ability to request tutorials, ask questions, unlock full-length 60-minute yoga videos, they're released twice a week, the link is in the description below. Thanks very much, guys. Take care, and I'll see you next time.